Night shift always started the same on Galehaven Refuge Station. The air tasted dry, like old paper and metal grit. Tonight the grit was worse, and everyone could feel it. Elias Mercer watched a line curl along the oxygen credit ledger wall. People stood shoulder to shoulder, quiet to save breath. A child pressed a palm to a fogged mask window. An older man counted vouchers with shaking fingers. The station speakers repeated a calm message, over and over. Your daily allocation is posted. Please remain orderly. Orderly meant small breaths and slower steps. Elias knew the sounds of the place by heart. Intake fans hissed through filters that never truly rested. Valve actuators clicked like teeth in the walls. Somewhere below, compressors drummed, steady and tired. Elias was the station oxygen distribution engineer. When air ran thin, his name traveled faster than truth. He kept his eyes on the red band creeping upward. Capture efficiency had dropped again. He ran a hand over a console seam and felt dust. It came from the wind outside, and from the war nearby. The console chimed, sharp and impatient. A new directive flashed on his screen. Rebalance. Cinder ward allocation reduction. Elias stared at the line, then at the stamp. It was authorized, but the author field was masked. He pulled the usage chart for Cinder ward. Consumption was flat, even slightly lower. No surge, no leak report, no fire. Yet the directive cut them harder than any other zone. He cross-checked the valve map. Ward gate valves for Cinder ward showed normal pressure. The manifold spine showed normal flow. Everything looked clean, which made it worse. Clean numbers could be the sharpest knife. Elias opened the maintenance channel to the floor team. Chief Baron, this is Mercer. A tired voice answered through static. Leo Baron, say it quick. Cinder ward reduction is queued. Any mechanical cause? None that we saw, Leo said. Filters are strained though. Strained is not a reason to punish one ward. Elias said. Tell that to the people above us. Leo replied. The line at the ledger hall shifted. A woman at the front argued softly with a clerk. Her vouchers were valid, but the scanner blinked amber. Insufficient credit, the clerk said, voice flat. The woman turned, eyes wide, and backed away. No one shouted, no one helped. They learned fast what panic cost in a sealed station. Elias watched her leave with her head down. He felt the old guilt rise. Familiar as thirst. He had signed cuts before. Long ago. By rule. Those cuts had killed a family in a dead-end corridor. He never forgot the way the corridor smelled afterward. Not death, just stale air and disinfectant. His screen flashed again. A second directive appeared, linked to the first. Stability priority. Enforcement enabled. That line meant the stability enforcement unit could lock valves. It meant a policy decision could become a sealed door. Elias saved a local snapshot of the charts. He tagged it with a time marker. He also added his own signature. Then he closed the ledger hall feed. He could not fix the war, but he could protect the record. Outside the control gallery window, the station curve showed darkness. A faint shimmer of dust skimmed the hull lights. It looked almost beautiful, until he remembered lungs. The intercom chimed, louder than before. External impact detected. Outer lattice struck. Elias froze for half a breath, then moved. He grabbed his suit jacket from the hook. He did not have time to fully seal up. He ran for the access corridor. Boots thudding. Behind him, the fans kept hissing like nothing mattered. The outer response bay smelled of cold metal and sealant. Emergency bubble shelters were stacked along the wall. A tow team rushed past Elias with a coil of tether. A tech at the console shouted without looking up. Escape pod in the debris net. Weak beacon. Elias leaned in. Faction tag? No clean tag, the tech said. Signal is smeared. Smeared meant either damage or disguise. Either way, someone was inside, and air was running out. The pod had hit the dust lock intake screens. Then lodged. A safety net saved it from drifting away. Barely. It hung outside the hull like a bruise. The bay captain, a grim woman with gray hair, spoke fast. Reception lock is ready. We need extra oxygen. Elias opened the bay oxygen panel. He saw the lock intake numbers and frowned. The lock had a reserve, but it was capped by policy. He keyed the request channel to command oversight. "This is Elias Mercer, Oxygen Distribution Engineer," a smooth voice answered. "Too calm for crisis. Air Allocation Authority, state your request. Increase reception lock oxygen flow." Elias said. "Escape pod recovery. Unknown occupants. Low cabin pressure." There was a pause, like a clerk turning a page. "Request denied," the voice said. Elias blinked. "On what basis?" "No approval code. Unknown occupant status." Elias kept his tone steady. "If we do not boost flow, they may die on transfer." Another pause. "Stability protocol applies. Allocation remains capped." Elias felt heat rise behind his eyes. "Stability is not rescue," he said. "Stability is survival," the voice replied. The line cut. Elias turned to the bay captain. "They refused. No approval." The captain swore under her breath. "We have 5 minutes, maybe less." Elias looked at the lock panel again. There was a maintenance bypass route. It existed for fires, decompression, and drills. It also existed because machines broke, and people lied. He pulled a cover plate and exposed the manual path. A tech stared at him. "Mercer, that is sealed." Elias met his gaze. "Someone is sealed too," Elias said. He keyed the bay captain's private channel. "If I do this, you did not see it." The captain hesitated for one heartbeat. Then she nodded once. Elias rotated the bypass valve. The system resisted, then yielded with a heavy click. Oxygen flow climbed. Not a flood, just enough to keep the lock alive. Outside, the tow team reeled the pod toward the hatch. A loud scrape traveled through the hull. The pod bumped, aligned, and clamped. Pressure equalization began with a low groan. Frost formed on the inner window like white veins. Elias watched the gauge and whispered to himself, "Hold, just hold." The lock opened. 2 responders pulled the pod hatch with pry bars. A thin gasp escaped, wet and desperate. A figure tumbled forward, strapped in and half-conscious. She was not human. Her skin had a pale sheen, like porcelain under harsh light. Her hair was dark and matted with ice crystals. A compact breathing collar clung to her throat. The collar blinked weakly, then dimmed. "Get her to Clinic Bay 9, the captain ordered. Elias stepped closer as they lifted her. She clutched a small hard case against her chest. Even half frozen, she did not let go. Her eyes opened, sharp for a moment. They were an unusual gray, focused and frightened. Elias heard her voice, thin but clear. "Do not let them read my device," she said. "No, thank you." No plea for comfort, just that warning, like a reflex. Elias leaned in. "Who are you?" Her lips trembled. "Veyra Solenn." Then her eyes rolled back, and she sagged. A medic checked her pulse and nodded. "Alive, barely." Elias followed them out of the bay. The bypass valve was still open behind him. Every second it ran, it stole oxygen from somewhere else. He could already imagine the headline, "Mercer steals air for an alien." He forced his mind back to the only thing that mattered. A living person was breathing, because he chose to break a rule. Clinic Bay 9 was full before Veyra arrived. Cots lined the hall, separated by thin curtains. People coughed into masks stained with dust. A nurse moved down the row, voice gentle and exhausted. Elias waited near the doorway while medics worked. He kept his hands visible and still. He knew how security read body language. A new voice spoke at his shoulder. "Engineer Mercer." Elias turned. A man in a clean uniform stood with 2 armed guards. His badge carried a simple mark, not a name. "Stability Enforcement Unit. Your presence is requested," the man said. "By whom?" Elias asked. The man smiled without warmth. "Director Oren Vask." Elias felt the station tighten around him. Director Vask ran the Air Allocation Authority in practice. He did not touch valves by hand. He touched careers, and people vanished. Elias looked back at the treatment room. Veyra lay on a table, breathing shallowly. Her hard case sat beside her, still chained to her wrist. "I will come after she is stable," Elias said. Now, the guard said. Elias did not resist. He followed them through a service corridor. The lights were slightly dimmer there. The air was colder, like the station saved comfort for someone else. They reached an office with a sealed door. Inside, Director Oren Vask stood by a wall display. He was tall, thin, and perfectly composed. He looked like a man built from policy. He did not offer a chair. Engineer Mercer, Vask said, you opened a bypass. It was a rescue, Elias said. It was theft, Vask replied. Vask tapped the wall display. A log view appeared, highlighting the bypass action. Elias recognized the formatting. It was not the raw mechanical log. It was a curated report, made to read like guilt. You deprived other wards to favor an unknown. Vask said, you did so without approval. During instability. Elias kept his voice low. If the lock failed, she would die. Vask watched him like a technician watches a fuse. Death is regrettable, Vask said. Collapse is unacceptable. He nodded to a clerk in the corner. Seize the control gallery logs. Vask said. Full audit. Remove Mercer access pending review. Elias felt a cold drop in his stomach. My access keeps the valves balanced. Elias said. Your access was used to violate policy. Vask replied. That makes you the hazard. Elias glanced at the side table. A sealed evidence bag lay there already, labeled with his name. They had prepared the story before he entered. Vask stepped closer, voice almost kind. Tell me why the pod came here. Vask said. Tell me what she carried. I do not know, Elias said. Vask tilted his head. You will. Elias held his ground, but he felt the trap closing. If Vask read Veyra's device, he could erase it. If Vask erased it, the pattern would remain invisible. Elias remembered the Cinder Ward directive. He remembered the masked author field. He realized the war outside was not the only war. Vask gestured toward the door. You will return to quarters. Vask said. You will not enter restricted areas. You will not contact the clinic. Elias breathed in carefully, like the air had weight. She asked me not to let you read her device. Elias said. For the first time, Vask's smile sharpened. Then she understands stability. Vask said. Stability reads everything. Elias walked out with the guards. In the corridor, the station sounded louder. Fans hissed. Valves clicked. Someone coughed behind a door. Elias reached a junction where maintenance ducts branched. He stopped as if to tie his boot. The guards paused, impatient. Elias glanced up at the ceiling panel seam. Leo Baron had once shown him how to pop it quietly. He stood again and kept walking. His mind was already moving ahead. He needed Veyra hidden. He needed the raw logs safe. He needed proof before Vask rewrote the station's memory. By the time the station switched to its false dawn cycle, the light turned pale. People stepped into corridors, squinting as if morning meant mercy. But the coughs did not stop. Elias listened to them and made his decision. He would hide Veyra Solenn, and he would become a target. 2 days later, the seal core filter cartridges began to rattle in the walls like a dry cough. On Galehaven Refuge Station, a new noise meant a new shortage. Elias Mercer was ordered to attend a public hearing in the Breath Ledger Hall. He stood behind the last rail, hands open, as if even his pockets were suspect. Veyra Solenn stayed hidden in a service alcove above the crowd, wrapped in a worker coat. Director Oren Vask entered without hurry and took the platform as if it belonged to him. The Air Allocation Authority seal glowed behind his shoulder. Along the aisles, the Stability Enforcement Unit waited with stun lances held low. Tonight we address an act that threatened station stability, Vask said. The main display switched to a timeline marked with Elias's name. A red spike showed the moment he opened the reception lock bypass during the pod rescue. A second chart followed, scaled so the diversion looked enormous. A clerk read the summary. Unauthorized oxygen diversion, system deficit, ward disruption. Elias kept his voice level. Those are not raw mechanical logs. He said, they are a presentation. Vask nodded slowly. Then present your facts. Engineer Mercer, he said. Elias offered his signed snapshot, sealed with his own station key. It showed a masked author field on the cinder ward cut. It also showed a reduction larger than the posted formula. The moment the strip entered the reader, the room leaned forward. The screen refreshed. The author field appeared unmasked, carrying a name no one recognized. The formula lines looked pristine. Elias's key tag flashed invalid. A few people laughed, sharp and bitter. Others shouted through masks. They were not sure why they were angry. They only knew someone had tried to fool them. Elias stared at the display as if staring could bring his file back. Corruption, Vask said, or forgery, either way, not evidence. Elias swallowed. That is not what I submitted, he said. Vask turned toward the crowd. Engineer Mercer is exhausted, he said. He wants a villain. He found one in policy. A new voice cut through the hall. Policy does not treat lungs. A woman in a neutral gray coat stepped into the aisle, the Frontier Relief Corps crest stitched at her shoulder. My name is Kessa Myrin, she said. I am a field medic. Respiratory deaths here do not match ordinary dust exposure. Vask smiled. Medical staff do not access distribution records, he said. Kessa looked up at the ward chart, then back to Vask. Then you will explain why the hardest cuts fall where dissent is loudest, she said. Vask did not answer her directly. He asked Elias a question meant to choke him. Engineer Mercer, do you stand with this outsider against stability? Elias felt every eye on him. I stand with anyone trying to keep people alive, he said. The hall tightened, like a valve turning. Vask nodded once, already writing the next sentence of Elias's life. Elias tried to speak again, but he knew he could not lecture a hungry crowd. He had fragments, not a story, and Vask owned the microphones. Veyra tapped his earpiece once. A faint signal from above. Do not chase their anger, her whisper said. Chase the mechanism. But Vask had already displayed the mechanism as a clean chart and a dirty man. Elias watched faces turn away from him. They did not hate him. Believing him simply felt expensive. By the next shift, the clinic halls smelled of disinfectant and warm recycled air. The cots were full, and the coughs were different now, deeper and wetter. Dust was part of life on Galehaven, but this sounded like lungs failing under a second weight. Kessa Myrin ran triage with the Frontier Relief Corps team. She moved with the calm of someone who had seen panic waste time. She peeled a mask from a miner's face and frowned at the gray film along the filter seam. She did not say, infection, first. She said, particles. Elias met her behind a curtain line where the lights flickered. What do you need? He asked. Raw oxygen flow by ward and by hour, Kessa said. Not the ledger board, not the hearing charts, the real curves. I do not have that access anymore, Elias said, not the allocation side. Kessa nodded as if she had expected it. Then we push where we can, she said. Veyra Solenn waited in a storage nook nearby, hood up, hands clasped around her hard case. She looked pale in the clinic light, but her eyes tracked every badge and every camera angle. Elias had moved her twice already, using maintenance routes he had once used only for repairs. Kessa stepped into the corridor and flagged a passing stability officer. I am requesting log access under medical necessity, she said. Patients are dying outside normal exposure patterns. The officer did not argue. He forwarded the request to the Air Allocation Authority. That was worse than an argument. Director Oren Vask arrived in person, not to help, but to be seen helping. He wore a clean respirator with a new seal, the kind clinic staff never received. Behind him, 2 stability guards scanned faces as if illness could be arrested. You are creating alarm, Vask told Kessa. I am documenting deaths, Kessa replied. I need distribution logs. Medical staff do not handle allocation, Vask said. You treat symptoms, we manage stability. Kessa glanced at the overflowing cots. Your stability is killing people, she said. Vask turned his gaze to Elias. You brought outsiders into my station, he said. And you keep appearing where you no longer have authority. Elias kept his voice low. I am an engineer, he said. Engineers go where systems fail. Vask's smile did not reach his eyes. Then accept this guidance, he said. Stay employed, and you might fix something. Keep choosing defiance, and you will fix nothing. Kessa looked at Elias, waiting. She did not beg him. She simply made room for his decision. Elias felt the weight of his job, the last thin thread connecting him to valves and screens. He also heard a patient inhale and fail to exhale. I will help the clinic, Elias said, even if you call it a crime. Vask nodded once, as if pleased to have the confession. Then you will live with the consequences, he said. After Vask left, the corridor felt colder. Kessa leaned close to Elias. He will starve the wards that talk back, she said. I have seen it on other fronts. He calls it containment. Veyra spoke from the nook, voice thin but firm. If you want proof, watch the valve spine corridor junction, she said. They can choke Cinder Ward there without making the public totals look even. The first strike came as a pressure drop, not an explosion. The ducts went quiet for a beat, and then alarms snapped awake across the lower ring. In the clinic, the lights flickered as if the station itself was blinking. Auxiliary oxygen line rupture, the speakers announced. Remain calm, await instructions. Calm lasted one breath. People surged toward wall mounts, grabbing portable breather canisters with shaking hands. Someone shoved a nurse aside and fell, clawing at a valve he could not open. Kessa Myrin cut through the crowd, voice steady. One at a time, she said. Breathe slow, do not waste it. Elias ran for the valve spine corridor junction, following Veyra's warning. Leo Baron met him with a seal kit already open. Lower ring spur, Leo said, right beside the Cinder Ward feed. They found the access panel breathing cold. The coupling had been torn, not cracked. It looked like force, not failure. Someone did this, Elias said. Leo shoved seal foam into his hands. Then fix it first, Leo said. Elias braced the joint while Leo set the foam. The whistle softened to a thin hiss, but Elias kept pressure on it anyway. Bootsteps hit the deck. Stability officers arrived with tablets raised, not tools. Their commander scanned the patch, then scanned Elias. Step away, the commander said. If I step away, it reopens, Elias replied. The commander tapped his tablet. A distant click answered, a valve upstream shutting. The air thinned instantly, like a fist closing. Leo coughed hard. They're isolating the spur, he said. Elias keyed his calm, breath tight. Kessa, they're cutting the spur, he said. Move your worst cases. Use canisters. I am moving them, Kessa replied. Get out alive. Veyra appeared at the corridor edge in a worker hood, her hard case strapped under her coat. She raised a small recorder for a second, then vanished back into shadow. Elias faced the commander. This coupling was forced, he said. This was sabotage. The commander did not flinch. You are spreading panic, he said. I am describing evidence, Elias replied. The commander chose a cleaner cut. Engineer Mercer, your system access is terminated, he said. Elias felt the words land like a vacuum. Without access, he could not reroute flow. He could not balance cartridges. He could not stop a quiet choke disguised as order. Stability officers escorted him away while Leo stayed at the patch, coughing into his mask. In the main corridor, a clerk waited with a printed notice, already signed. By order of Director Oren Vask, the clerk said, Engineer Elias Mercer is suspended from all allocation systems pending review. Elias took the paper and felt its weight like a sentence. He could still repair metal, but his key to the station's breathing was gone. An emergency broadcast followed, timed to the confusion. Distribution protocol is now active, the speakers said. Non-compliance will be enforced. The next allocation update blamed the rupture and cut Cinder Ward again. Elias returned to Clinic Bay 9 with the suspension notice folded in his fist. Kessa rationed canisters like she was counting heartbeats. She pressed a breather to a patient's face, then handed the next one to a nurse without looking up. In a supply nook, Veyra moved her hard case into a medical bin under soiled linens. 2 stability officers walked past the curtain line and never saw it. Elias understood the price of saving anyone here. You paid in air, and then you paid again in your name. On the 3rd night, the corridor lamps were dimmer, and the sound of breathing was louder than footsteps. 1 week later, people spoke softer to save breath. On Galehaven Refuge Station, a raised voice felt wasteful and risky. Even the fans sounded subdued, as if the ducts were listening. Elias Mercer kept to service corridors, moving like a man already erased. His suspension notice did not matter anymore. What mattered was how quickly strangers turned their faces away, like he carried a leak in his chest. A public screen at White Bay Commons replayed a short clip of him from the depot corridor. The caption called him a destabilizer. A second line warned that sabotage would be answered with stricter allocation. For the safety of all. Below the screen, a notice board advertised a stability forum in the Breath Ledger Hall. The announcement promised transparency. The fine print promised consequences. Elias slipped into the back rail and watched director Oren Vask take the platform. Vask did not look angry. He looked helpful, like a man offering order to a frightened crowd. We cannot survive rumor, Vask said. We survive rules. And we survive unity. He played a second clip, edited tighter than the first. It showed Elias turning into a side duct at the depot corridor. Then it cut to a pressure chart dipping in Cinder Ward. The crowd murmured. The edit made cause and effect feel simple. Elias felt the room accept the story because it asked nothing from them. A clerk read the charges in a calm voice. Unauthorized access, infrastructure interference, oxygen credit fraud. The words landed like labels that did not need proof. Elias could not explain the raw trace without revealing where it was hidden. He could not explain Veyra without painting her target on the wall. He stood silent and watched Vask use that silence like evidence. Vask opened the floor to questions, but he controlled which questions existed. A man asked why Cinder Ward cuts kept returning. Vask answered with sympathetic phrases about filter strain and sacrifice. A woman asked why the clinic death count rose while public totals looked stable. Vask praised medical workers and promised a review committee after order returned. Then Vask offered the final lever. If you see Engineer Mercer, report him. We will provide emergency oxygen credits to cooperating citizens. The crowd did not cheer. They did not need to. The offer turned fear into a currency, and everyone understood currency. Elias left before the forum ended. In a narrow corridor, a miner from Cinder Ward blocked him near a vent grill. The man did not shout. You stole our air, the miner said. Elias held his palms out. I opened a bypass to keep a pod survivor breathing, Elias said. Your ward cuts were ordered before that. They showed us your charts. The miner replied. They showed us your lies. Elias felt the familiar trap. The one Vask built in public and spread into private. The station did not need proof. The station needed a target. Elias stepped back and let the miner keep his dignity. He walked on, listening to coughs behind thin doors. Every cough sounded like a vote. Veyra Solenn met him behind a coolant panel in the valve spine corridor. She wore a worker hood and kept her hard case under her coat. Her eyes scanned the junction like she expected cameras to blink. They're using you as a warning sign, Veyra said, and they are moving fast. Elias crouched as if checking bolts. Tell me what you know, he said. Veyra spoke in clipped phrases, like she was rationing oxygen and truth together. Director Vask filed an emergency petition to the Border Peace Compact. He wants indefinite authority over oxygen allocation. No review dates. No civilian override. Elias stared at the duct seam. He already acts like he owns the station, he said. He wants the signature, Veyra replied. He needs a crisis that looks permanent. He needs unrest that looks unsolvable. Elias pictured Cinder Ward getting cut again and again. He pictured the clinic rows and the gray film on masks. He pictured the way the crowd had laughed when his key flashed invalid. He will choke the wards that question him, Elias said. Veyra nodded once. And he will call it containment, she said. He will call your rescue the first spark. Elias felt the choice tighten around him. He could leave on a maintenance shuttle and breathe somewhere safer. He could live and let Galehaven turn into a controlled cage. If I leave, I survive, he said. Veyra did not soften it. Yes, she said. If I stay, Elias said, I might still stop him. Veyra's voice dropped lower. Then we need raw logs, she said. Original distribution trace, offline, the kind that cannot be polished into a story. Elias knew the only place still storing that level of record. The old distribution depot. It was decommissioned, but never emptied. It will be locked, Elias said. It will be guarded, Veyra answered, and it will be worth the risk. Elias listened to a filter cartridge rattle in the wall like a cough. The station sounded sick. He made his choice without drama. Tonight, he said, quiet and fast. The old distribution depot sat behind the compressor's deck where heat never fully left the metal. Elias and Veyra slipped in through a service hatch he once opened with a proper badge. Tonight he opened it with a thin tool and a steady hand. Inside, the air smelled of stored plastic and dust. Crates of seal core filter cartridges lined one wall. An archive cabinet stood on the other, sealed with a new authority strip. Elias moved to the cabinet first. Filters could keep people alive. Logs could prove who was killing them. He lifted the seal strip slowly and set it back so it still looked intact. The cabinet clicked open, revealing a slim offline data unit labeled Oxygen Credit Ledger. Raw trace. He tucked the unit under his coat. The metal felt cold through fabric, like a piece of the station's spine. Elias forced himself not to look at the filter crates yet. A faint knock came from deeper inside the depot. Not metal settling, a human signal, small and careful. Elias froze, then followed the sound to a door he had never seen on maintenance diagrams. A viewing slit cut across it. Authority foam sealed the latch plate. A voice behind the door whispered, rough and short on air. Help, please. Elias leaned close. Who are you? He asked. Kessa Myrin, the voice said, Frontier Relief Corps. They locked me in after I treated a detainee and asked for logs. Veyra's eyes tightened. They're holding medics now, she said. Elias scanned the wall and found an auxiliary valve panel for depot pressure tests. The gauge needle sat low, as if the line had been intentionally starved. They're draining this room, Elias said. Veyra glanced toward the corridor outside. We have little time, she said. Elias turned the auxiliary valve. The pipe answered with a soft hiss, and the gauge lifted. Behind the door, Kessa coughed once and took a deeper breath. Kessa's voice steadied, but anger stayed in it. They said medical work is not authorization, she whispered. They said lungs are not my jurisdiction. The latch foam still held. Elias did not have a proper cutter. He had a pry bar and the knowledge that the station punished hesitation. He jammed the bar under the plate and leaned. The plate bent with a sharp creak. The foam cracked, then broke. Kessa stumbled out, visor fogged, lips pale. She grabbed the wall and forced her breathing into slower rhythm. Elias caught her elbow and steadied her. Can you walk? He asked. Kessa nodded once. Yes, she said, but do not take the crate. They want you slow. Bootsteps sounded in the corridor, quick and purposeful. Veyra shoved the raw trace unit deeper under Elias's coat and grabbed Kessa's wrist. Move, Veyra said. Elias resealed the cabinet strip as they left, so the depot still looked untouched. He wanted Vask to search longer before he found the missing proof. A stability patrol rounded the bend. Their leader raised a tablet and a lamp. Stop, the leader said. Elias did not stop. He turned into a side duct and pulled the others after him. The duct smelled of coolant and old dust. Their boots scraped loudly, and Kessa bit back a cough to keep from giving them away. A stun pulse cracked against the duct mouth and scorched the edge of the panel behind them. Elias kept crawling. shoulders scraping, fingers numb from cold metal. They dropped into a recycler bay and pressed behind a humming unit. Elias held the raw trace like it was fragile glass. Kessa's breathing slowed until she could speak. I saw a list in that holding room, she whispered, names marked for reduced allocation. Not crimes, opinions. Veyra stared at her. He is building a catalog of dissent, she said. Kessa looked at Elias, eyes hard. I am not with you because you broke that door, she said. I am with you because you did not trade a trapped person for a clean name. Elias met her eyes and understood the cost of that sentence. It was a bond made of choice, not gratitude. It also made her a target now. Director Oren Vask answered the depot breach before anyone could name it. By mid-shift, the public screens replayed a message about contamination risk and hostile interference. The station was told to report unusual movement. People obeyed because obedience felt like breathing. Elias, Veyra, and Kessa reached the cold vault annex, where thick metal racks dampened signals. The air was colder there, but stable. It felt like a room that still respected physics. Elias plugged the raw trace unit into an offline reader. Lines of flow and cut schedules filled the display. The pattern was unmistakable. Cinder Ward and the lower ring were choked on the same cycle. The cuts aligned with protest gatherings and clinic spikes. A policy rhythm, not a mechanical accident. Veyra leaned in, jaw tight. This is intent, she said. This is leverage. Kessa traced a line with her finger, careful not to touch the screen. People are dying on a schedule, she said. The reader flickered. A sharp buzz filled the vault, like insects trapped in a can. The screen glitched, and several headers fractured into static. Veyra yanked the connector. A close-range jammer, she said. Electromagnetic radiation burst. They know we are reading it. Elias stared at the damaged trace. The core pattern remained, but the clean chain of custody was scarred. Proof had become a fight again. We still have fragments, Kessa said. Fragments lose hearings, Veyra replied. He will call it forged again. A new alert rolled through the station at the same time. Public meters dipped, corridor lamps dimmed one step. People paused and listened, as if the station had inhaled and refused to exhale. Veyra's face hardened. He is cutting a wide zone, she said. He wants panic. He wants you visible. Elias heard his pocket unit ping on an old maintenance channel. Leo Barron's tag blinked, frantic and weak. Elias, Leo said, breath thin. They sent us to patch the auxiliary spur. They sealed the compartment behind us. Elias stood so fast his chair scraped. Where? He asked. Bay 3 service pocket, Leo said. Jaren Kale is getting dizzy. Elias ran with Kessa and Veyra close behind. The corridor air felt warmer than it should, a sign that circulation was being throttled. A few residents held canisters close to their faces, eyes wide, conserving words. The compartment door carried an air allocation authority seal. Fresh authority foam covered the manual override. A camera above the frame watched the corridor like a patient predator. Elias hit the intercom. Leo, hold on, he said. Leo's voice came faint. Jaren is down, he said. He stopped responding. Kessa pulled her cutter from her bag without being asked. She cut into the foam with controlled pressure. Elias jammed the pry bar into the seam and pulled until the door gave. Thin air spilled out. Leo stumbled forward, coughing and shaking. Inside, Jaren lay on the deck, mask crooked, eyes open but empty. Elias knelt and checked for a pulse. He found none. Kessa's hands moved by habit, then stopped when reality refused. She closed Jaren's eyes and pressed a hand to Leo's shoulder. It was a small human act that did not fix anything but still mattered. Leo sobbed once, sharp and silent. He did not have air for more. Veyra filmed the seal tag and the foam smear on the override. This is the lure, she said. He wanted a death that looks like an accident. And he wanted your hands on the door. Elias looked at the camera above the frame and understood the message. Rescue could be turned into proof of guilt. Inaction could be turned into proof of apathy. Vask had built a corridor where every direction fed him. A station-wide broadcast cut in, timed to bury grief under instruction. Effective immediately, Galehaven Refuge Station enters wartime distribution structure. Director Vask announced. Allocation will be centralized. Access privileges will be reissued under stability supervision. Unauthorized movement will be treated as hostile interference. Doors stayed shut along the corridor. People listened and did not speak. Fear conserved oxygen better than any policy. Kessa stepped beside Elias, voice low. Sometimes saving lives means being hated, she said. Elias tightened his grip on the damaged trace unit. He could already feel the station turning against him again. He accepted it, because the alternative was silence. Before dawn, the station was quiet as if holding its breath. 3 days later, the smell of ozone from an old compressor haunted the hallways. It clung to hair and fabric, and it made every breath feel like a borrowed favor. Elias Mercer learned to walk with his shoulders soft and his eyes alert. Under wartime distribution, every corridor had a camera, and every camera had a clerk behind it. The Stability Enforcement Unit did not need to chase him anymore. The station itself did the chasing. A door pause, a stare down, a whispered warning, and a life could shrink by another inch. Veyra Solenn waited for him in a maintenance pocket behind a warm coolant line. Kessa Myrin stood beside her with a medical satchel and a grim patience. The three of them looked like a repair crew that had lost its work order. They were not armed, but they were no longer harmless. We do not win by shouting at Director Oren Vask, Elias said. We win by making his control expensive. Kessa kept her voice even. People are dying in slow motion, she said. Expensive is good, fast is better. Veyra set her hard case on the deck. The casing was scratched, but the latch still held. My trace unit is damaged, she said, but the pattern is still there. We need to show it in a way the station can understand. Elias opened a panel that held a skinny bundle of mechanical leads. These lines were not policy. They were pressure, temperature, valve position, and rotor load. The ledger is a story, Elias said. The machines are a diary. He tapped the manifold spine map on a portable reader. Under the new structure, Vask could adjust oxygen credit ledger totals and call it balance. Then he could choke a ward at the ward gate valves and blame filter strain. We stop chasing the ledger board, Elias said. We compare the diary to the credit story. Where they disagree, we find the choke. Veyra nodded, already assembling fragments in her head. I can reconstruct missing time blocks, she said. Not perfectly, enough to show pressure drops before the credits do. Kessa glanced down the corridor where patients moved like ghosts. And when we find it? She asked. Elias pointed at a thin route line labeled maintenance. The route was meant for testing an emergency purge, and that was why it still existed. We reroute oxygen through service lines, he said. We build community breathing points that do not rely on his meters. Kessa frowned. People will gather, she said. He will call it unrest. He will, Elias said. So we do it openly, with names and witnesses. Not hiding, but operating. Veyra's eyes narrowed. We also need a place to store proof that is not online, she said. Elias slid a small metal box from his tool pouch. Inside were old data slugs used before the station modernized. Ugly and heavy and hard to erase. We write the diary to these, Elias said. If he edits the screens, the slugs stay. Kessa took one slug and weighed it in her palm like a coin. This is what fairness looks like now, she said. A piece of metal you can hold. They moved at shift change, when corridor traffic gave cover. Elias and Veyra opened access grills and crawled service runs that smelled of hot dust. Kessa stayed above and mapped patient clusters by the clinic doors. By the time the station's false daylight dimmed, 3 small community breathing points were live. Each point was a simple rig, a service tap, a pressure limiter, and a sign that read, "Breathe slow, share fair." In Cinder Ward, a man with a cracked mask took the first turn at the rig. He looked at Elias as if deciding whether hatred was still cheaper than trust. Elias did not argue with him. He tightened the limiter, watched the gauge stabilize, and stepped back so the man could breathe. Veyra watched the crowd and whispered, "This will force him to react," she said. Kessa answered without looking up. "Good," she said, "let him show his hand." The call came from the labor tier, where the station ran oldest and loudest. A runner found Kessa at Clinic Bay 9 and spoke through a stiff mask. "Fire doors locked in Shaft 17. The runner said, "A filter crew is trapped. The air is dropping." Kessa grabbed her satchel and moved, and Elias followed without asking for details. Veyra stayed close behind, quiet and watchful. Shaft 17 was a vertical throat of metal with ladders bolted to the wall. The automatic fire door had sealed after a compressor surge, and the override panel flashed red with no manual mercy. Through the door window, headlamps bobbed in a tight cluster. A woman pressed her face to the glass, eyes steady despite the thin air. Her features were alien but familiar in the way work made everyone look the same. She held a compact breather canister to a man's mouth while keeping her own breaths shallow. Kessa keyed the intercom. "This is Kessa Myrin," she said. "Can you hear me?" The answer came low and controlled. "Talanne Rho," the woman said, "air filtration technician. 7 people, 1 canister. The door will not release." Elias checked the override plate. The wiring was intact. That meant the denial was a command, not a failure. Veyra leaned in and pointed down the shaft. "Old purge line junction," she said, 2 meters down, still pressurized. Elias nodded. "I can feed your compartment from below," he said. "Stay calm and keep them seated." Talanne turned to her crew. "Back to the wall," she told them. "Breathe like you were paying for it." Elias dropped into the shaft on a tether line. The rungs were slick with dust, and ozone burned from overheated motors. He found the purge junction and braced both hands on the stiff handle. The valve resisted, then yielded, and a thin hiss became a steady feed. "Talanne," Elias said into the intercom, "watch your gauge." Through the window, Talanne glanced upward. The needle lifted, slow but real. She shifted the canister away from the sick man's mouth for a moment so he could take a longer breath. Her face did not soften, but her hands steadied. Kessa watched the corridor. "Stability will notice the flow change," she said. "We need them out." Elias climbed back up and timed the door by listening to the duct tone. When pressure equalized, the latch clicked and the door slid a few inches before sticking. He jammed a pry bar into the seam and pulled until it gave. 7 workers spilled into the corridor, coughing and blinking. Talanne came last, upright and clear-eyed. She looked straight at Elias, as if rescue was only the first question. "You rerouted oxygen," she said. "That means you broke a rule." "It means you are alive," Elias replied. Talanne studied him like a component that might fail under load. "Alive is the minimum," she said. "What are you doing beyond rescue?" Veyra answered, voice level and fast. "We are building breathing points and collecting mechanical proof," she said. Director Vask is choking wards while the ledger stays clean. Talanne's gaze sharpened. "I have watched filter loads spike after every so-called stability meeting," she said. "You are not imagining it." Kessa stepped forward. "Then help us," she said. "We need someone who knows the filtration backbone." Talanne looked at each of them in turn. Her eyes did not linger on gratitude. They lingered on competence. "I will help," she said. "Not because you saved me. Because you did not trade those workers for your reputation." She took another step closer. "And I will not stand behind you," she said. "If we change this station, I stand in the decision." Elias nodded once. "Equal seat," he said. "Equal risk." Veyra watched his face as if checking for performance. Kessa's expression softened, not with romance, but with respect. Talanne accepted the offer with the same firmness she used to keep people breathing. By night cycle, word had spread through the labor tier. and more crews asked where the community points were. Director Oren Vask struck back quickly. The next public update on the oxygen credit ledger warned of unauthorized breathing points and urged citizens to report them. Stability officers sealed the first community rig in Cinder Ward with authority foam. A posted notice called the spot a riot seed, and people backed away in exhaustion. Elias watched from a side corridor with Veyra, Kessa, and Talanne. Instinct pushed him toward the officers, but Talanne stopped him with a hand on his sleeve. "Do not fight the picture he wants," she said. "Change the picture." Kessa carried clinic sheets on paper with names, symptoms, and times. Veyra held a metal data slug loaded with mechanical traces from the manifold spine and the ward gate valves. Talanne carried filter load strips from the labor tier, showing spikes that matched the chokes. None of it was pretty, but it was real. They walked into White Bay Commons at shift change, when the crowd was thick enough to matter. Vask had scheduled a stability briefing there, framed as a warning against sabotage. He stood before the main screen, calm and clean, with the stability unit behind him like furniture. His voice was soft enough to sound reasonable. "Gathering makes the station unstable," Vask said. "Instability spreads war." Elias stepped forward. A few faces tightened, and a few eyes dropped away. "You sealed breathing points because they worked," Elias said. "You are choking wards while the ledger stays clean." Vask smiled. "Engineer Mercer is unauthorized," he said. "He invites you to break rules that keep you alive." Kessa raised her voice just enough to carry. "I am a medic," she said. "Deaths rise after the same cuts. These are the times. These are the wards." Vask kept his tone gentle. "Medical staff do not interpret allocation," he said. Talanne stepped beside Kessa. "I run filter load tests," she said. "Filters spike when pressure is choked upstream. These strips match the drops." Veyra set the data slug on the edge of the public console. Unconnected but visible. "Your ledger is a story," she said. "The machines are a diary. This slug is the diary." Vask let out a soft laugh. "Anyone can scratch lines into metal," he said. Elias took a maintenance seal stamp and pressed it into wax on the slug. He raised it where cameras could see. The stamp carried the manifold spine calibration mark, issued years before Vask arrived. If Vask called it false, he would be calling the station false. A cough tore through the front row. A woman held her mask tight and stared at the sealed rig notice as if she could see her ward on it. A man from Cinder Ward lifted his hand halfway, then lowered it when his breath failed him. Bodies did not argue in paragraphs. They argued in missing air. Vask saw the shift and chose his real argument, not as a slip, but as doctrine. "You want freedom to breathe," Vask said. "I want the station to survive. If we do not control breath, the station fractures. If the station fractures, the war outside walks in." Talanne shook her head once. "Control is not the same as survival," she said. Vask's eyes sharpened. "Survival is governance," he said. "Governance is scarcity management. I will not let a crowd decide valves." Elias felt the countdown under his feet. Talanne had checked compressor cycles and whispered the hard number, and it made his stomach go cold. "The primary oxygen reserve covers one more cycle," Elias said. "Then corridors fail. If we do not regain the central distribution hub, your control becomes a mass grave." Stability officers shifted, hands tightening on stun lances. Vask lifted a hand to stop them, because he wanted the crowd to watch. "Then come to the hub," Vask said, "and confess." Elias looked at Veyra, Kessa, and Talanne. None of them asked him to be a hero. They asked him to be useful. In the commons, doors began to lock one by one. Soft clicks rolled outward like a wave, and people realized the briefing had been a net. That night, the door locks sounded louder than gunfire. False dawn switched on, but no one called it beautiful. The ceiling panels in Galehaven Refuge Station brightened to a clean white that felt like blame. 2 days of thin air had trained people to speak in shorter sentences. Even laughter sounded measured. In the corridor outside Breath Ledger Hall, a line formed before the meter board, and no one chanted anymore. Elias Mercer waited in a service void near the central distribution hub. The metal around him hummed with valve motors and tired compressors. Each hum carried the same message: there was not enough to waste. Veyra Solenn crouched by the access grate, her hard case tight to her ribs. She was an off-world comms auditor, still moving like someone who expected to be chased. Kessa Myrin checked her triage slate, then tucked it away, as if saving battery could save a life. Talanne Rho held a torque key and a spool of seal wire. Calm as a worker who has learned to count breaths. Elias kept his voice low. "We go in through maintenance, not the main door." Talanne nodded once. "The maintenance spine still touches the manifold. If I reach the control rack, I can hand the valves back to sensors." Kessa watched the hall and the thin strip of camera light. "They cannot fire in there," she said. "A puncture would kill everyone." Veyra tapped the hard case latch, then looked past them toward the line at the meter board. "They trust screens more than people," she said. "Make the screens speak first." They moved on the next patrol gap. Elias lifted the grate and guided them into the crawl. The duct was narrow and warm, and dust stuck to their gloves. Every breath tasted of filters that had worked too long. Halfway through, Talanne paused. She pressed her ear to the metal and listened. "2 guards at the console," she whispered, "one on the intake ring." Elias worked an older mechanical lock and eased a side panel open. The station had been built for repair, not perfect control. Old access still existed, if you remembered where. Talanne slipped inside first and found the control rack. She began to work without a pause. Her fingers moved with the confidence of someone who had fixed broken lungs for a living. Veyra placed a data slug on the rack shelf and ran a wire into a service port. The hub screen above the console flickered, then changed. A guard looked up. "What was that?" he said. "Signal noise," the other guard said. "Stay on the hall." Talanne spoke without looking up. "Distribution will follow pressure and occupancy. It will ignore labels." Elias watched the console guards through a thin gap. He saw the moment the numbers stopped obeying the ledger and started obeying the station. The labor tier curve rose by a fraction, and somewhere down the line, a child could inhale without a wheeze. Kessa keyed her communications link to the clinic channel. "Breathing points are live again," she said. "Keep people in lines, no rushing, no running." Veyra pushed the trace to the hub display. A timeline of pressure drops appeared, ward by ward. Beneath it, the oxygen credit ledger totals stayed clean. A calm story trailing a thinning reality. A second overlay showed rotor load spikes at each cut, the signature of deliberate throttling. The nearer guard turned. "That is not the briefing format," he said. "It is the machine diary," Veyra said. "You have been reading a story." The guard reached for his comm. Elias stepped out and raised his hands. "Do not pull a weapon," Elias said. "This room cannot take a stray pulse." The guard hesitated. He knew the hub was not a battlefield. It was a lung. A loud mistake would not pick sides. A voice came from the hall speaker, calm and sharp. "This is Director Oren Vask," it said. "Engineer Mercer, you are inside my hub." Elias answered. "Your cuts are killing wards," he said. "The traces are on your own screens." Kessa opened the hub door one hand width. "Clinic Bay 9 matches these drops," she said. "People are dying on schedule." Outside, boots shifted, but no one fired. Talanne tightened the last connection. The manifold pitch changed, smoother and less strained. "Fair distribution is active," Talanne said, "but he still holds the master lock." The master lock was a physical gate tied to an authority module. Under wartime structure, it could starve the labor tier with one command. Director Oren Vask appeared on the hub camera feed, clean and composed. "You think you are saving the station," Vask said. "You are destabilizing it." Elias held the hub mic. "People are dying under your stability," he said. Vask leaned closer. "Then watch what disorder costs," he said. The hub alarms chirped. On the manifold map, the labor tier lines turned amber, then red. A station chime echoed through the vents, and somewhere far away, a door seal hissed as it tightened. He is closing the primary gate, Talanne said. He is using them as leverage. Kessa went still. If he drops them, we cannot carry that many patients, she said. Our oxygen carts are already empty. Veyra's hands shook once, then steadied. He wants a public confession, she said. He wants you to become the villain. Elias opened the authority casing. He could bypass it with a manual crank and a fracture pin. The pin was for disasters, not politics. It would snap and scar the system for weeks. Talanne read his face. If you break it, they will call it sabotage, she said. If you do not, people die now. Kessa spoke low, like a promise made under bad light. I will triage the worst first, she said. I will take the anger. I will not take their breath. Do it anyway, Elias said. Keep them alive long enough to hear the truth. Veyra pushed a second feed to the hub screen. It showed names marked for reduced allocation. The list was partial, but it was human. Next to each name, the pressure line dipped on a matched timestamp. A voice from the hall shouted, "My sister is on that list." Another voice answered, smaller, "My son too." Vask replied without warmth. Risk flags prevent panic, he said. Without control, war walks in. Elias spoke into the mic. Open the gate, he said. Do it now. You can still claim you chose mercy. Vask smiled. Confess on the public board, he said. Admit oxygen fraud. Then I will open it. Elias did not bargain. He gave instructions like a technician under pressure. Veyra, record everything, he said. Kessa, keep people in lines. Talanne, hold the sensors steady. He set the fracture pin and pulled the crank. Metal screamed softly. The authority lock shuddered, then gave. The labor tier curve eased from red toward yellow. A few seconds later, Talanne saw pressure return to the worst branch, and her shoulders dropped by a millimeter. The hub lights flickered. A station alert spread. Master gate override engaged. System stability reduced. Better fragile air than no air, Elias said. Kessa's comm crackled with clinic voices. 2 more collapse cases. 1 child breathing again. Keep the hallway clear. Outside the hub door, the stability enforcement unit moved closer. Engineer Mercer, step out and be detained, a commander said. Elias looked at the others. I will step out, he said, but the screens stay on. You are giving them your body, Veyra said, not your story. Elias nodded. Do not let them rewrite it, he said. When Elias stepped into the hall, stun lances rose, then stopped at a careful distance. No one wanted a discharge near hub seals. A corridor crowd had gathered, drawn by the screens. They watched the cuts and the names, and their anger shifted into something harder. It was not a riot. It was attention, and attention made lies expensive. Director Oren Vask arrived in person, flanked by guards. You chose chaos, Vask said. I chose air that does not ask for votes, Elias said. Vask faced the crowd, voice smooth. Order is mercy, he said. Scarcity must be managed. Breath must be controlled, or war will take you. Talanne stepped forward, gloves stained with dust. We lived your control, she said. It tasted like metal and funerals. Kessa lifted her clinic sheets. People did not die from nature, she said. They died from decisions. Veyra raised the metal data slug. This is pressure and valve position, she said. It matches the deaths. A man in a taped mask called out. Why were our names on a list? Vask answered the idea, not the man. Because dissent cracks stations, he said. I will not let a crowd decide survival. The crowd looked back at the screens. Vask's truth sounded like a cage. And cages do not feel like safety when you cannot breathe. A new voice came from the far end of the hall. Frontier Relief Corps Oversight, it said. Director Vask, you are relieved pending review. Two relief officers stepped forward with sealed orders. Their gear was plain and serviceable. They looked like people who expected to fix damage, not celebrate it. Vask's smile thinned, then failed. "This station will collapse without my control," he said. Kessa spoke, steady and tired. "It already collapsed under your control," she said. "Now we rebuild with witnesses." The relief officers took Vask's badge and led him away. The stability unit stood down, grateful for a new chain of command they could point to. The hub stayed fragile. The override scar stayed on the board. Filters still clogged. People still coughed. Scarcity did not vanish because a villain fell. But the ward gates now moved on sensor reality, with manual cross-checks. Talanne formed a shift team from labor crews to watch valve logs. Kessa formed a triage rotation with relief medics and trained volunteers to carry oxygen carts without fighting. Veyra pressed copies of traces onto metal slugs and stored them in 3 separate lockers, so one raid could not erase them. Elias sat through a review hearing in Breath Ledger Hall. He spoke in simple terms, with no hero tone. "I broke the lock to keep people alive," he said. "I accept the cost. Do not let anyone own the valves again." He lost his master access key. He lost the comfort of being seen as a good employee. He did not lose the station. That evening, he walked past the ration kiosks without a badge. A worker he had never met offered him a spare mask seal. Not as charity, but as routine. Elias realized the station had not forgiven him. It had simply decided he was worth hearing. In a place where air was currency, that was a different kind of wealth. 1 week later, people stopped checking the breath clock every minute. They still conserved oxygen, but the limits had faces now, and the faces could be questioned. The meter board remained, yet beside it hung a second board listing valve positions and filter loads for anyone to read. Veyra, Kessa, and Talanne visited Elias after his release. They did not arrive one by one. They arrived together. Talanne spoke first. "In our culture, we do not compete," she said. "We build a household around responsibility. We share the load, or we do not claim the bond." Kessa nodded. "We are not trophies," she said. "We are co-signers. If we stay, we work and we answer for our choices." Veyra met Elias's eyes. "3 names can hold a door against fear," she said. "If you want that door, we stay." Elias did not promise a perfect world. He promised an equal seat and an honest valve. "I want a home where no one asks permission to live," Elias said. "If we build it together, I will not walk away." On a small panel beside their assigned quarters, the housing ledger displayed 4 entries. Elias Mercer, Veyra Solenn, Kessa Myrin, Talanne Rho. There was no ceremony. There was a shared meal in recycled air, and a plan for the next filter swap. The station kept breathing. For the first time in a long time, it did not feel like a favor. In Galehaven Refuge Station, nothing became a miracle. Filters still clogged, and metal dust still crept into every seam. People still learned to speak with less air. But the valves no longer moved in the dark. The numbers on the boards finally matched the pressure in real lungs. That was enough to change the way a hallway felt. Elias Mercer walked the corridors without a master key. He carried a wrench and a spare seal. He also carried 3 names that made the work feel like home. Veyra Solenn, Kessa Myrin, and Talanne Rho. Home was not the richest place in the system. It was the place where no one had to beg for permission to live. If this story stayed with you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel, so we can keep building these worlds together and bring you the next journey soon.